evening. I'm so glad you can join us today for UX Evenings at Google. I wanted to introduce myself briefly. My name is Julie Schiller. I work on UX culture and community in Asia Pacific, leading it for many of our offices here. I have been a UX researcher for over 15 years, and I'm really excited about the topic I'm going to get to share with you today. First, let me tell you a little bit about UX Evenings themselves. UX Evenings at Google is an initiative to try to connect speakers from across the region, especially those within Singapore, to allow our community to connect, discuss user experience, and enable us all to grow together. We're going to have 3 great speakers today. We've invited for you here today Khai Seng Hong, Edwin Mohammad, and our own from Google, Javier Bargas-Avila. We're really lucky to have them with us today, and we're each going to share a unique perspective about different roles inside of user experience. We have a beautiful and diverse field that is talking about understand truly the nature of our users and how we can build better, more captivating, more exciting, more valuable, more meaningful experiences for them. Our first speaker tonight is going to be Khai Seng Hong. Khai Seng is the founder and the director of Studio Doho. He has been a huge part of the UX community here in Singapore since 2004, focusing on design research and interaction design. He's a big believer in holistic experience spanning things from digital to spatial to product and to service. And Khai Seng's really involved in delivering design as part of that equation. He's also going to talk a bit about building sustained impact and culture change. His team over at Studio Doho is advising a lot of companies about design thinking, futures thinking, organization development, and leadership development. And he's been coaching leaders and teams throughout the region to talk about how people can do more good for the world they live in. Today, Khai Seng is going to talk about a really exciting opportunity for us all to learn more about a UX strategist. In a moment, I'm going to kick it off to Khai Seng. You will be able to, during this talk, to add comments and questions in the box. Please take some time, introduce yourself to our team. We're really excited to get to know you and hear the questions. At the end of this, there will be a live question and answer session. So please enter in your comments and questions here for Khai Seng and the other speakers to reply to. And with that, I turn it over to you, Khai Seng.
Hi, everybody. My name is Khai Seng. I'm really excited to be able to share my thoughts with you today. First of all, I really want to thank Google for inviting me over to share a bit about my experiences being a UX strategist. Thanks so much for that. Yeah, so I'll dive into it right now. So I've been asked to share a bit about what a UX strategist does, and I'd love to share a bit about what I do the past few years as a practitioner. So my name is Khai Seng, and I'm the founder and director of Studio Doho. I'll jump in a little bit to introduce a bit about myself, and then I'll talk a bit about what is the day in the life like of a UX strategist, specifically around a strategist in an agency, because that's where I come from. And then the perspectives and thinking that's really useful for a strategist to have. Yeah, so let's dive in. So a quick introduction for myself. I actually am not a classically trained designer. I graduated from computer science. I found it interesting to see the fusing of both computer science and business itself. So I moved on immediately after graduation to design research and interaction design, which I love a lot. And part of that took me after 14, 15 years to the point at which I am at now. So before my current job with Studio Doho, I led the Foolproof team in Singapore. So Foolproof is a UK-based specialist design agency. So they are specialists in user experience and experience design. And yeah, I learned a lot from there in my 5.5 years leading the team before I took a 6 month break for myself. And as I was figuring out what I want to do, that led me to start Studio Doho. And Studio Doho is essentially an outfit that helps to mature and improve internal teams. So I help to coach teams to get better at what to do. Yeah. So A part of my experience in UX strategy has been working on really awesome projects. And very quickly, I just ran through some of the ones that I did was with Shell, Heineken, Citibank, Dell, and in Singapore, DBS is a bank in Singapore, and recently has been voted the world's best bank and world's best digital bank as well. So check them out. So I'll sprinkle a bit of my experiences as I'm sharing a bit later from some of these projects. Yeah. Um, most of the times when we talk about UX strategy, and if you Google about UX strategy, a lot of people define them in this way, which I think is pretty straightforward. It's really the intersection of user experience and UX with business strategy. So let's dive in a little bit deeper, right? Because it's quite a high level understanding. And yeah, so Tim Lu, whom I really admire and work closely with in Foolproof, he's the executive director of strategy. And yeah, he describes it as a long-term plan to align every customer touch point with your brand's position and business strategy. So I think that's a really nice way to say it's really a link between the touch points that you have and how you want to position yourself and what works for you as a business. So I'll give you an idea of like what's it like to be a strategist. So I wasn't a strategist by name, but a lot of things that I did were incorporating a lot of strategist work. So I'll give you an idea of like, typically what would a design agency and a strategist department in that have. Some of it would be something like this. A client will come to you or a business would say, yeah, what would it take to get my product adopted by everybody, right? And how do we organize, the 3 sites and the 7 microsites you have in a cohesive way? Obviously, this has ties to content strategy as well, but then there's also a link towards the business and how they want to position themselves and how they want the public to see them, the customers to see them. Another one that I had, and this was really fun, was for people to ask us to find them a new market segment that's not been tapped before. So this alludes a little bit to Blue Ocean Strategy. So that's a really lovely book around strategy as well, if you want to take a look at that. And yeah, one of my last few years in Foolproof, we also had this project where a bank said, yeah, we are number 10 in this market now. We want to grow our customer base 10 times in 3 years. And that was really challenging, especially when you're not known in that market and that country. And the last, and this is the one that I love the most, which is what is the future of work, of what's the future of learning, what's the future of education, and also what is our company's place in it? Like how can we profit from it? How can we be strong in that future? What can we do now to get to that future? So these are a sample of the kind of projects that I was on. Yeah, unfortunately, I can't tell you the exact stories. As you probably understand, a lot of the strategy kind of projects are usually confidential as well. So but I'll share a little bit as we go along. Yeah, as much as I can. So this, yeah, is typically what you work on. And in each of these, typically you go through certain tasks in a day in life of a strategist. So you start off with, where are we now? You do some kind of user research, some kind of competitive benchmarking, see where the competitors are. And then very importantly and very commonly for strategists, where do you want to be, right? So you ask the organization and help the organization vision for them, what ambitions they have in the future. And then tied to the vision, what kind of experience design principles will be needed to make that vision successful. And obviously along the way, you can't just jump there right from the start, right, to your North Star. So you need to figure out how do you get there. And that's really the realm of road mapping and capabilities as well. So as a UX strategist, you would consider what capabilities do we have to get there? And then if we don't have the capabilities to get there, how are we going to get that for the organization? Last but not least, it is how do we know we are there? Right? So these are certain metrics that we want to have certain KPIs, some ROIs that we want to be tracking, so that we know that we're getting closer and closer to the North Star. So yeah, so that's a lot of the work that a strategist does. And part of it is you might be thinking, well, oh, those things I do as well. So am I a strategist? And I thought one way to think about that is to see where you are placed in the organization. So typically you have people working on the product or the user interface. Usually there'll be UI designers, front-end engineers, or you might be working across multiple touch points on the customer journey. And that's where maybe some of you sit as a UX designer. You may considering things across mobile, desktop, or in a physical space like a bank branch as well. So where I see UX strategists fit is there will be definitely contact with the customers that the UX designer and the UI designers would have, and the strategist does that as well. But strategist also is the one supporting the bridge between these people and the CEO or the top management at the organizational level. So the strategist really is bridging between the experiences that people have, the customers, and how they feel about the organization and the products and services, and the CEO or the organization's business objectives. And obviously, as part of that, they have quite different outcomes or outputs and deliverables than the UX designers and the UI designers. But also the strategist looks at the ecosystem. He looks at the environment outside of the organization, the trends, the competitors, what's really happening, because that's also part of informing the strategy. Yeah. So if you feel like you are getting more time with senior business leaders, or you're getting as much time with senior business leaders as you are working with customers and with interfaces and UI, then you could be, doing some of the strategist roles and responsibilities. Maybe not in name, but this is how I see that happening. So let's dive deeper into strategy and what it is. And strategy is derived from the Greek word for general, and obviously that's the general in the battlefield. And so for me, a lot of how I think about strategy is it's about making specific choices to win in the battlefield. Well, nowadays we aren't in war so much, and I guess for us in the world of business and products and services, really for us it's the marketplace that we are engaging in. So I think it still works in terms of the definition. We are really trying to make specific choices to win in a way that will give us the outcome that we want. And so what kind of strategic choices do we make? If you say we are making choices to win, how do you do this? And that's where I think even if you do these things, it might not make you a strategist. So you might do user research, you might do some road mapping, you might do some visioning as a UX designer. But I think what the key thing that makes you a strategist is the choices that you influence. So it's less about, okay, here are the 10 user insights that we've got from our 30 interviews with people. It is about, out of these 2 are the most important because they help us achieve business strategy X and Y. So it's really about choosing which insight to act upon. And in terms of visioning and the North Star, it's also choosing where you want to position yourself. And that's part of, a typical business school's 2x2 matrix. And this area isn't populated, so let's go there. It's not as crowded in the marketplace. And it's also choosing how do you want to execute. What do you want to execute in terms of capabilities, and then sequencing them. And how do you want to measure success as well? Because that also drives a lot of you are what you measure a lot of times. So that's also a key motivating factor in terms of a strategic choice. So yeah, in summary, I think a strategist really facilitates the organizational choices that allow your product or service to win in the marketplace. So the question then is, well, how do we make good choices? And to me, to make a really good strategic choice, you have to learn to see what others cannot see. So it's a bit like chess, where you have to guess what the opponent is trying to do, and then you do something that the opponent cannot really guess, and then you win and you do a checkmate and surprise the opponent. So there's two things. You have to see what others cannot see on the board, and you must be able to capitalize on it. And obviously, this is a very zero-sum perspective, right? There's a winner and a loser. But obviously, in the marketplace, it's not that way, right? You can have multiple winners. You can grow the pie so that everybody wins. This is just a more simplistic way to explain the concept, but do understand that, yeah, there is a bit more complexity to this. So we want to be learning to see what others can't see. Well, how do you do that? Well, the first really great one to do is user research, right? That's where you really understand the customers and how they feel. But that's only one side because that's what the customers feel. You have to also understand the business, like what Tim Lu was talking about, right? The business strategy and the brand positioning, which is what the organization wants. Sometimes people ask for competitive benchmarking and to follow what the competitors are doing. For me, that's not very strategic. I feel that um, seeing what competitors do is always a lagging indicator because they always have other things planned that haven't been released. So you don't actually know where they're going. So following them by what they are showing now is a lagging indicator. And what you really want to look at is leading indicators, right? Things that will not say predict, but will give you a signal of what might come. Not something that's happening after it happens. So for that, I think really it's about here. When you are visioning, you have an idea of where your company or product is supposed to be. You have an idea of the broader world in which the product or service sits in. And that world may or may not be the same as what you think is happening now. So the issue is the world changes, and the world changes whether you move or not, right? Other people are also doing things. They are also trying to change the world. And if you cannot see how the world is moving, it's going to be really difficult for you as a strategist. So I think that's a key part of learning to see what others can't see as well, which is to understand how is our world changing. And that's where I bring in future. Future thinking is another field, and it's more than 50 years old, so I do encourage you to Google for it. But it's the idea that the future is not really, what's happening right now, plus or minus 10%. There's a different way to think about the future, and this is a really rigorous way. I really appreciate that. So I'll run through very quickly how this works, some of the things I've learned from futures and how it applies to strategy. So this idea of now and where the world is now. And we typically would have an idea of, what the future might be, whether it's 3, 5, 10 years down, 20. So this is the business as usual future that we would assume is going to happen. But there are more than that. There are more possibilities than that. And there are many other futures. And it's important that you think of them in multitudes. So there's the probable futures that would likely happen. There's plausible ones that could happen. There's possible ones that might happen, and there's even preposterous ones that probably would never happen. And also the strategist wants to work at the preferable, right? The ones that should happen, that we want to happen. How should we act as a company? How should the market be like? How can we influence the industry? And there's a lot of these, and you have to understand to see all of these different futures. And that's why it's called future thinking with an S and not future thinking. So why would we want preposterous future? Like, it's not going to happen, right? Well, this is the year 2020, the year that keeps giving. We're only 2/3 of the way through, and I'm sure you have experienced a lot of preposterous futures experiences in this that you couldn't imagine 2 years before. Right, so there's this meme that keeps going around, but who led the digital transformation of a company? Is it the CEO, the CTO? Well, most probably it is COVID that has transformed that the most. And that's the idea of where, your company culture or digital is influenced by something that's a health issue, right? And nobody would really imagine that. There's this thing about scenarios. So people trying to imagine scenarios for 2 decades in how should they respond when a pandemic happens, and they never really accounted for politics to influence healthcare and healthcare strategies. So again, you are most likely going to be disrupted not from within your industry but from outside, and that's what futures thinking helps you to see. So really, it's future thinking is about prototyping different futures to stress test your present assumptions and your ideas and your solutions. Yeah. So I'll give you a quick example. I was doing a project on the future of learning, and it's really funny. As part of that workshop, we had a conversation about, oh, what if climate change happens, and in Singapore, we get flooding everywhere, and we can't go to schools, right? Because nobody has boats to row to school, and we're cut off from school. And this raised the assumption that, oh wow, yeah, we are thinking of education being delivered through a physical location, centralized, where many people come together to learn and to be educated. And what happens if there is a flooding and we can't get there? So obviously, there was a thinking about a way to mitigate that, a possible solution to address that. And a lot of times we laugh it off, like, that's not going to happen. That's 2 years ago. And guess what? They're not laughing now, right? Because a few months ago, we had to close the schools, right, for COVID. But they've already rehearsed that and they already understood, okay, we need to do certain things. So that's something to consider. So that's what I mean by prototyping the future. And in terms of this, Jim Taylor actually had a way of identifying 4 possible futures to consider: the growth, collapse, discipline, and transforming futures, where you really transform differently. And what you can do is you can test your strategies across all of them to see whether they work or not. And you might realize, oh, there's one strategy that doesn't really work well for your initial idea, but is really strong with other possibilities. And that's something you can incorporate as well, right? And mix and match. Something to think about as you test your strategies out across multiple futures. So yeah, it's how might we design for many possible futures? Can your vision be strong enough across multiple futures? That's something to think about. So I'm going to end this off with a really nice quote, I think, by Jake Dunnigan from the Institute of Future. Do Google their work as well. It's really good. And I love this because it talks about, it's really better to be scared by a simulation than be blindsided by reality. I think we've all, in some ways, been blindsided by reality this year, 2020. So do consider that as a really important capability to have if you want to be a strategist. So I'm going to end off very quickly with a few resources. There's some amazing conferences being run, or has been run by Paul Bryan under UX Strat, so check them out. A few articles from Jim Kalbeck that I really love. There's a strategy blueprint, which is a bit like a business model canvas, but for strategy. He's got a lot of links under resources on UX strategy that you can check out. And if you're a bookworm like me, there are a few books that I really recommend for UX strategy, specifically business strategy and scenario planning. And if you want more depth in futures, this is a really good book, Foundations of Future Studies. And happy to answer any questions you all have. And feel free to connect with me on Twitter or LinkedIn. I love your feedback and love to have a conversation with you. All right. That's it from me.
Thank you so much, Khai Seng. It was really interesting to hear about UX strategy and how you've grown and shared this knowledge with us all. Our next talk is going to be from Edwin Mohammad. Edwin is the UX writing lead at Blibli, and Edwin's got a lot to share with us today about how he's designing user experience with language. Just a little something to share about Edwin. Deep down, a product designer, and he's now the lead of UX writing at Blibli, managing a team of writers with diverse backgrounds, ranging from fintech, marketplace, TV networks. And before Edwin was over at Blibli, he spent a bunch of time at Gojek as a senior UX writer for GoPay. A couple of years ago, he was at Traveloka for their lead story copywriter role as well. Away from that, you might also know Edwin as the host of Warung Copy. It's a podcast fueled with conversations about technique, career paths, and trending things for UX writing, UX writers from Indonesia especially. He's a firm believer that everyone has their own unique way of making the world a better place. And with Edwin, he does it one microcopy at a time. In this next talk, Edwin will tell us a little bit about how he wears so many different hats. Over to you, Edwin.
Hello from Jakarta. I can't tell you how excited I am to be here. But before we get started, can I have a show of hand emojis in the comments if you're a UX writer? You know, it's nice to be around another UX writer because normally we'd be swapping so many stories about the work that we do. And whenever we do that, there's always something new to experiment since, this is still a new field compared to other UX roles. Perhaps some of us here may have never heard of UX writing before until now, and that's totally fine. Speaking of this evening's topic, what is UX writing or user experience writing? How important is it within a UX team or a design team? Do companies nowadays even need UX writers? And furthermore, how do we collaborate with other UXers and cross-functional teams effectively? Well, I'm glad you asked because that's exactly what we're going to talk about through my presentation. My name is Edwin Mohammad and I lead the UX writing team at Blibli. A little bit about Blibli. We're an online superstore with quality curated products where customers can experience the best service of shopping online to fulfill their everyday demand. Now, going back to my earlier question, what is UX writing? I'd like to share with you a story about a family tradition that we celebrate every year. Well, of course, except for this year, unfortunately. Everyone say hello to my Uncle Iwan, 62 years old and still on fire. In our tradition last year, like any typical conversations we have with our uncles, he wanted to know what I had been up to. So I told him about my job, that I was a UX writer and I design user experience with language. The reaction I got after was, well, to say the least, he tilted his head and began to wonder what on earth is UX writing. He had no clue at all. So I took out my phone and I opened the Blibli app and I showed it to him and I told him that I was the one who wrote the words on the app. He was surprised and, believe me, not in a good way. He knew there was a full-time job for writers, but he never imagined there would be someone doing full-time writing on an app. All this time, he thought, well, anybody else can do it. Well, I agree that anyone can be a writer. We all know how to write, but I'm not so sure that everyone knows how to write on an app or a website for that matter. Because writing in general and user experience writing are not like two sides of the same coin. For instance, if you can add 100 more followers with your Instagram caption or write compelling email messages, that doesn't mean you can immediately do UX writing. With UX writing, and this may seem a little ironic, writing itself isn't the fundamental part of the process. Because I won't lie to you, although our skills are measured by the words we choose to put up on our app, writing often takes up only about 10% of the work, of the effort we put in, because writing often comes later in the design or UX process. The rest of the day is usually consumed with product discussions on understanding our users' problems, designing solutions on top of that, and of course, research, and research. I'll be much more methodical about this later. So, to put this into perspective, what's more fundamental than writing is actually understanding the word UX itself. What is it all about? Why is it a big deal for companies to scale? And how does it relate with language? See, if we don't study the world of user experience and we only focus on writing, probably we wouldn't be considering the user's persona every time we write. Because remember that writing on an app is not like writing on our personal blog where we can freely choose any words we want. Second, we wouldn't know which words appear or linked with other screens or products or features and whatnot. And last but not least, we probably wouldn't consider the brand personality, the voice and tone, and the principles of UX writing if we do not understand user experience and we only focus on writing. As you can see, there are a number of things that we need to consider before we even put words on an app to ensure whether they make or break the user experience. Let me give you an example. Allow me to take you on a journey through the era when we did not have UX writers until we had one, or even now that we have teams of UX writers. Right, before there was a UX writer, most of the words we often see around the web were computer language written by managers, designers, and programmers. Now we all know this wasn't supposed to be their primary job, but hey, they did it anyway. Although these words may come out cold and with no reassurance at all that everything here is okay, at least they went above and beyond to ensure our computers had something to say when the internet broke down or when the server was busy. I know that if it weren't for their extra miles, these managers and programmers, I'm pretty sure UX writing will not be as evolving or as sophisticated as it is today. So let's take a moment to appreciate all their hard work. This is the reason it is important to hire a dedicated writer, or what we call now as UX writer, to ensure the words on our app today are clear, comforting, problem-solving, and natural. These are some examples that we have on the Blibli app. We try our best to make the words speak the way we do with our close friends, personal assistant, favorite doctor, or what have you, depending on the brand character that you want to build for your app. Right, let's talk a little bit about the words UX, the title UX writer. Other names for that we may have heard of are product copywriters, UX copywriters, content strategists, and content designers. These are different names, but basically they're all headed in the same direction, solving people's problems through usable and delightful experience, with words being the output. So again, I think my uncle was right about, one thing, that anyone can be a writer. But writing on an app requires us to demonstrate understanding of user experience, like I said before, or in other words, product design. For example, here at Blibli, in my role as the lead, I strongly encourage my team to brainstorm with designers, researchers, engineers, including key business people, so they would be familiar with UX discussions and therefore constantly exercise their design thinking. The other goal is to let everyone in our product management and tech departments know that we can contribute more than copy. So I think generally the challenge that we're facing as UX writers anywhere around the world, and I say this based on the forums and communities that I've been following, is raising the awareness that we matter as much as other roles in UX. Because the difference among numerous UX roles is basically within the technical competency. Take me, for example. I happen to like writing more than drawing or coding, but that doesn't mean that I care less about user satisfaction. It definitely does not mean that I care less about building the company through design. I care as much. And I know for sure many UX writers out there in Singapore and everywhere else see it the same way. But probably some of us are not encouraged enough by our teams yet. We're not mentored or nurtured enough by our teams yet. So for UX writers, for us UX writers, although it's true we need to know a lot about writing, we need to know a lot about language, grammar, lexicon, everything in between, In order to join forces with other UX roles and do so effectively, besides being a UX writer, or to be a UX writer, we need to be able to wear many hats. And I actually brought something. As a UX writer, we need to be able to wear an engineer hat. We need to be able to wear a researcher hat, and we need to be able to wear a designer hat. So these hats. Now, I'm not saying we should be like them, but understand at least the tip of the iceberg, or know the basics at least, just about enough for us to blend into their discussions, probe the right questions, and provide constructive feedback. So forget writing for just a moment and put focus on UX. And this includes the little things that we do every now and then, like choosing keywords to search on Google instead of searching for UX writing. Try to search minus the word writing, or search for product design. Then wire everything you know and find ways on how to connect them to language. Because after all, UX writers are the type of writers who need to think like product designers. There should not be any gap between these two fields. The question now is, isn't product designer just another word for UX or a UI designer? Like fall and autumn, 12 and dozen? Well, that's a good question. Let's look at it this way. Like the word doctor, with it we have other more specialized roles like dentist, OBGYN, or pediatrician. Different responsibilities, but are all headed in the same direction, making healthier lives. Now, like the word product designer, we have UX designer, UI designer, UX engineer, UX researcher, and UX writer. Different disciplines, same goal. So in other words, if there is a role that we all share together as UX practitioners, it is product designer. To me, product designer is a multidisciplinary role. So if there's one advice that I could give to the UX writing community, or to those who'd like to kickstart a UX writing career, it is that you need to build a UX-oriented mindset. Know that your job is not only writing, but you will work alongside other UX roles and even roles outside your UX department. And once we are designed in this mindset, I guess the rest of what's important about being a UX writer follows, as you would likely have more motivation to know how to grow your career as a UX writer. You'll gradually know how to make a bigger impact on society and on the organization you work for. And zooming in, it's in your nature to want to gain a deeper understanding about your product, the features you're shipping out. And all that if put together, you'll know how to be more considerate on choosing which type of copy is more appropriate for your brand and your users. Where to place them on the UI, how lengthy the copy should be, etc. With the mindset of a product designer specialized in writing, you would also have the urge to improve how you collaborate with your teammates in the UX department and even outside of it. We're talking about our folks from marketing and brand, sales, operations, finance, human resources, and many more. When we speak of collaboration, I'd like to make sure that my team and I have established a workflow. Not only so we know where to begin and where to finish, but also in which discussions must we be involved, what we need to prepare in advance, the expected output out of each discussion, the tool that is required to complete a certain step, and the common key actions that we need to do next. I'd like to begin this with a story that we at Blibli Design have gone through in shipping product copy for our new initiatives, design revamp projects, cross verticals, and everything else that requires us to work on a bunch of screens. Now remember when I said writing takes up only about 10% of the work that we do? This is the part where it becomes much clearer. We normally begin the workflow by joining a discussion where we meet with our UX designer to walk us through the low fidelity wireframe. On a high level, this stage is all about understanding our business objective and how we can achieve that through design. On a technical level, it's about knowing the context of every single screen here and how they interact with one another. See, in this discussion, I need to do two things. First, I need to wear my user's hat and ask myself, do I understand the flow? Second, I need to wear my UX writer's hat and ask myself, do I need to add or remove copy from the wireframe? By removing, I mean, because sometimes we don't need copy, right? Sometimes copy can be replaced with an icon, or we can disable a button instead of showing a toast message. As a UX writer, I usually also ask, is the length for copy enough or too much? So this is now me wearing my UX writer's hat. Before I was wearing my user's hat. So those are the two things that I usually do during this discussion. Next, after we've understood the flow and received the iterated wireframe from our UX designer, now is providing draft copy. This is the part where we can showcase our writing skills, and this is the fun part for most writers, including me. Make sure that we write based on our style guide, our voice and tone. And if you're writing with writers or language specialists in multiple countries, say in Singapore, this is the moment to make sure that all the copy in all languages convey the same message. And to make sure of that, we can use English as the base or default language, or master language as they say. Afterwards, and most importantly, is localization. By that I don't mean translation. Note the two are different. With localization, you are actually portraying the everyday lives of Singaporeans in this case. Like this for a fun experiment. How we could possibly adopt Singaporean dialects or Singlish into UX writing for onboarding, success, and failed scenarios. Alright. The step after providing draft copy is my favorite part. Research. The goal of research is to recognize our user expressions when they skim the UI text. And the goal is also to discover any ambiguity or unfamiliar terms, as well as explore suggestions from our participants. Actually, just about a week ago, one of our UX writers for the seller team conducted a copy research using brand image testing, tone testing, highlighter testing, and survey. It was a comprehensive report because we collaborated with our amazing UX researchers. Right here, this is an example of highlighter testing. Green is the color that indicates the copy is clear, red is for unclear copy, and yellow is sort of in the middle. You get it, but you also have doubts. Cool. After research, copy iterations obviously come afterwards. When that's done, our next step is pretty much the same as the first step on our workflow, which is wireframe. Now we're in a room with our UI designer, walking us through the wire flow, or in this case, now is the high fidelity wireframe. Alright, next on the workflow is what I consider the most important part of the process, QA. Really make sure that we are included in the session. Because this is where we all meet in one room, from designers, writers, engineers to managers. This is the part where we take a closer look at the preview or demo version to ensure that all the copy displayed on every single screen are exactly how they should be. The reason this part is important, especially for me, is because the step afterwards, the step after QA session, is live in production. So again, really make sure that all the copy on the demos version are exactly the same as how they've written by you since from the beginning. Okay, this is how we collaborate with other UXers in our Blibli design family. With other roles outside our department, we normally catch up with our friends from marketing and brand. Last time was an all-hands meeting involving everyone in UX and the marketing creative team regarding our brand personality. Other meetings, or should I say constant group chats, usually only involve copywriters and UX writers to ensure there are no overlapping projects. Considering the difference between copywriting and UX writing are still gray, I guess. Other than that, communications constantly happen to ensure we are always writing in the same voice. Alright, thank you very much for tuning into my session. I hope that moving forward, we'll know better on how to work hand in hand with UX writers in our team. If you don't have one yet, I believe this is the best time to hire one. And for the UX writing community, I really hope that this presentation can be a reference for making a bigger impact to our organization with language, through language. All right, I guess that's all from me. Bye.
Thank you so much, Edwin. You inspired me. I got my very own hat as well. I hope while you're all thinking about the other hats you wear, you can get ready for our final talk from Javier Bargas-Avila. He is from Google. He's the head of platform user experience research on Google Cloud. He's one of our own. We're very proud to have him join us today. He has experience as a UX research manager of more than 20 years in the field. He's passionate about building up effective research organizations that are scaling and delivering critical user insights to teams to help build successful products that delight users. He's currently leading the UX research organization for Google Cloud Platform, but before that, he also led UX research teams on Google's Brand Advisor products and YouTube. Before he joined Google, he built and managed the HCI Research Lab in the University of Basel. Very excited to share Javier's words with you today, and now handing it over to you, Javier.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the UX evening at Google. It's evening for you maybe in APAC, in Asia, but not for me. I'm based in Europe, so for me, it's like a normal day. My name is Javier, and I am managing a team of UX researchers at Google. And I was asked to give you an introduction into the role of UX research and what UX researchers do at Google. So that's what I'm going to focus on. Before I get started, let me give you a glimpse into my journey to UX research and how it came to be that I'm talking to you right now. I have a background in psychology. I went to study psychology at the University of Basel in Switzerland. That's where I'm from, with the goal of becoming a clinical psychologist. That's what a lot of psychology students do when they start. But I quickly learned about the field of UX, or HCI, how we called it, human-computer interaction, and realized that I had a lot more passion about working in that field and combining my passion for technology with the passion I have for understanding people. So I did my master's in psychology and went to work as a UX consultant for a couple of years in a small consultancy in Zurich, in Switzerland, where I consulted mostly with companies from finance, like insurances and banking, about different product development questions and how to make them user-focused. After that, I went back to academia and I built up a HCI research lab at the University of Basel, where we built up the curriculum, training students, doing research ourselves, and also publishing. And so I did a lot of research, published that, and got eventually my PhD. I stayed for a couple more years in the university. I loved that job. It was exciting to train and work with all these students. But then in 2011, I decided to leave academia and moved to Google. At Google, I became a UX researcher. So I did research for YouTube. It was really exciting, and I learned how to work in the field of large company, like Google. And a little bit later, I started to manage that team of researchers, which was small at that time, and then moved over to focus on the ad side of the YouTube business, so video ads. Built and grew that team. Later on, I became the managers of managers, so I had a bunch of different research teams within Google brand advertising. That was really exciting because I learned not only how to manage researchers who do research, but also manage managers who manage researchers. Since 2018, I moved to Google Cloud, where I manage a team of about 25 researchers, a mix of quantitative and qualitative researchers that focus on cloud platform. I'm not going to talk specifically about that work, but more about the UX research discipline. That's a little bit of a glimpse to understand what my journey was. What is UX research? UX research, you can say, is the systematic study of target users to understand their behavior and the requirements, and to generate insights that help the team, the product development team, that you can feed into the product development process. So we're trying to understand users and to give the necessary information to the teams so they can develop a product that makes sense for users. Because it's really hard, as we know, to develop a product in isolation, in like yourself, like an engineer locked up in a little room somewhere without knowing what is happening in the real world. And so that's the job of UX researchers, to create that focus on users and to bring back that knowledge to the teams so they understand how to develop the product in a way that they're delightful. We have many different UX roles at Google, and so UX research is only one of them, and you'll get intros into other roles during this evening too. So we have by far the largest amount of people are UX designers. These are the ones who actually solve the problems, create the designs, create the flows and the products in a way that hopefully they solve the problems users have. We have UX research, which is what I am and what I'm going to talk about, but we have other roles too, like managers or UX engineers, content strategists, and so on. So we are going to focus on research. And within research, we have different lenses, you can call it. I call it lenses because these are all researchers. We don't have different job roles or profiles. In that sense, we're all UX researchers. The UX research job description is method agnostic, but we have researchers that focus more on qualitative research or more on quantitative research. And we have, for instance, also survey scientists. So these are all in the job family of UX research and in the job family that tries to understand users. So who are UX researchers? Like, UX researchers are typically people that have a curiosity to understand people. That's why I'm where I am. I'm a psychologist, and so I was always curious about understanding people, their thought processes, how they behave, these kind of things. So you need to be curious about people and have a strong passion to try to understand how they think and how they behave and what that means for the products that you are developing. So the goal is to provide an unbiased view on users. So you are a user advocate. You are in charge to create empathy for the users, to understand users, and to provide these insights back to the teams. So this is not, as a UX researcher in a company, in a context like Google, you are not paid to just understand users for the sake of it, because it's interesting, because you're curious. There is a purpose behind it. There is a goal, which is you want to help the team to develop delightful products. And so they need the insights that help them do that. Not just any insights, they need the insights that will make them, that will help them to create products that work. What kind of educational backgrounds do researchers have? I would say it's all over the place. So you can come with a lot of different backgrounds. These are the most frequent ones, but we have all kinds of backgrounds. I've had researchers with a background in journalism. We've had researchers with a background like in medicine. So there can be many different, more fringe backgrounds, but we have a lot of psychology people in human-computer interaction programs, human factors. We also have computer science backgrounds, so there's programs around the world that actually cover HCI-related things in computer science, and so we have people coming with that background, obviously cognitive science, and other ones. I want to stress here that if you do research and you're in charge to generate user insights, some people might think that you are in charge to validate the mocks of UX designers. So UX designers create a solution, then you go and validate that, and you tell them if it works or not and what they need to fix, right? And to a certain extent that is true. I mean, that is part of the job as a UX researcher, that you will validate some of these solutions to figure out if they work. And that is due to some of the history and how these roles became to be. It's very often that in companies you will first hire designers to create the solutions, and then later on you will hire researchers, and these researchers might be hired by designers, and so the designers hire them to validate their mocks, and so the research is in that role, and it takes a while for research to emancipate and to actually grow out of that perception of being basically the testing monkey for designers. And so I want to stress that here, that ideally you will be in a place as a researcher where testing the designer's mocks is one part of your job, but your role is much broader than that. A researcher focuses on the entire product development process through all these different phases. And so, but if you think about it in a process that goes through forming, drawing, building, and launching, then researchers have a say and a task in all of these phases. In the first phase, forming, we are at a stage where we might not even have a product. We just know we do want to focus on creating a product, and we need to understand the users before we do that. So we're in the forming phase, and researchers can help to understand what kind of needs and behaviors users have. So we're in that formative phase where we do use methods such as diary studies or field studies. We talk with users, we interview them, we try to understand the context of use and what they do and what they need. In the drawing phase, we're trying to figure out like all this knowledge that we created in the forming phase, like how can we best use that to solve the problems. And so here we have other methods that researchers use, such as heuristic evaluations or card sorting or paper prototyping, paper prototype testing, these kind of. So we have then some kind of like a structure of how this product will look like, how it will behave, which we then start to build, maybe first in some kind of an interactive prototype, or maybe also like an implemented version. So we go into that building phase where we're trying to understand if users are actually able to use it. Are the solutions we came up with and all the pre-work we did actually working when we show it to users? And so we can understand what is working, what not, and try to improve it during that phase. And when we launch, the job is not done. As researchers, we are also in charge to understand how things are working. Are users using it? Do they understand it? Are they successful with it? Do they like it? What are the problems they have? How can we improve that? And so we can look at user feedback that we get. We can look at all kind of UX metrics. We can look at the logs, but we can also run surveys and experiments and these kind of things with the launched final product. I'll give you a couple of examples for different questions that you focus on in these different phases. In the forming phase, for instance, you could let's assume you want to create a product for consuming music, right? And so in the forming phase, you might ask yourself, how do users want to consume music while they're commuting, right? The specific use case. And so what would you do as a researcher? You would go and observe users while commuting and listening to music. If you go to the drawing phase, you will then actually try to think about what are the best ways to structure your app, your product, the music genres, or whatever feature you might come up with that helps them consume music while commuting. And you can test that, right? So you can actually draw that on a paper and you can show that to users and you can have a conversation about how that's working. And then when you build it, then you will see if you want to understand if users can actually find the favorite music, right? So you have actually something that works and you want to observe if they do what you expected. You build everything in a way where that it would trigger the expected behavior that you were seeing, but did it actually work or not? So that's what you're trying to find out. And in the launching phase, so when you launch the product, you will then actually look at the actual behavior. You have an app or you have a product and you can see what users are doing. Are they using the feature that you created to help them consume music while commuting? Are they using it in the expected way, or are they doing workarounds? Are they doing things that weren't expected? We are trying at Google to move to what we call a four-legged stool. So for a long period of time, and I'll go back in history of Google a little bit, Google is an engineering company, right? It was created by engineers. At the beginning, we had only engineers. And then through time, they realized, this is getting way too big to have only engineers. We need somebody to manage the product development. And so they created a role of product management. And so for a long period of time, they had product managers and engineers. There was no UX. Then later on, they realized, our products are not looking as nice and they're not behaving as good as maybe the competitors. What are we lacking? And they realized, the discipline of UX that actually focuses on excellent product design is missing. And so they hired UX, and that was UX design mostly in the beginning. And then later on, UX design hired a bunch of researchers. And so we were trying for a long period of time, and up until recently, to say we need a three-legged stool. We have product, eng, and UX, and they have an equal seat at the table. When we develop products, the best products are created if these disciplines collaborate as equal partners. And that is, I would say, nowadays mostly the case at Google. Most of the products actually have a place where UX is recognized as a discipline, an essential discipline in the product development. In many cases, and obviously that's also research driven, so I have a very biased view here, we're trying to move towards a more of a four-legged stool philosophy, which means that designers and researchers should be part of that. It's like the four disciplines being part of product development. That depends, again, on the maturity of the teams you're in. But ideally, my experience is that the best products are created when these four disciplines work as equal partners. Great, that was it already in my quick glimpse into what UX research does. If you have any questions, we will have time here to answer them, or you can reach out to me. Here's my LinkedIn page. Thank you for listening and excited to have a discussion with you.
Wow, Javier, thank you for sharing all of that with us. I hope you have all been listening carefully, putting a bunch of comments out here. Our team is working hard to pull them together, and we're going to switch over now to a live question and answer. Let's jump over to the line where we've got the three speakers waiting. Thank you so much, everybody, for getting to share about your insights. This has been an amazing session, and you can see from the chat going on, lots of really good questions came in from the audience. I know we're slightly over, but I want to make sure we get some of these questions answered for you. So let's jump into the first question, and this is for everybody. We heard a lot of questions in the chat about what is the difference between a UX strategist perhaps versus a PM or business strategist, or what's the difference between a UX writer and a copywriter, a tech writer. And I'm sure research, we have people have questions about our role as well. I'd love to hear from you guys, how do you differentiate what you do as a UXer from the other roles in your company?
Should I go first?
Yeah.
I think so. I think the different roles in different companies, different roles are defined differently, and how they interact with you depends also on the size of the company, on the maturity, and on the needs. And so I don't give a lot of worth to those labels. It's more important to look into the job description and to realize as a UXer that even the descriptions are just words on paper. So at the end, you need to figure out what does the team need and provide that. So as a writer, you sometimes have to extend into research. I've seen that happen. Some of the best writers at Google, they also think as a researcher, and that's why they have the different hats and stuff, right? And or as a designer, you might need to sometimes test your own design, which is not ideal, but there's no research around. I've seen some questions around that too in the chat, right? So as UXer, you need to flex your muscle and try to look into the different hats, which will also give you more opportunities afterwards if you try to change jobs. And so don't put too much worth into those names. They also change through time.
Thanks, Javier. Do you want to add on, Edwin?
Yeah, I totally agree with Javier. And I mean, like Blibli, I think one of the most important thing is that when we enter a meeting room, I try as much as possible to take off my UX writer hat, right? Because like when we sit in the meeting room full of designers, PMs, engineers, I mean, like we're all focusing on one goal, which is solving problems. But when we're outside the meeting room, that's where we do our own special skills, right? With me writing, and then the others designing, and then coding, so on and so forth. So I think really try to understand first that what underlies these different roles are you're focusing on the same direction, right? Building the company through design, building the company through code, but the difference is within your technical competency. Yeah, that's for me.
Yeah, I just want to echo everybody's response. I think essentially it depends on the company's needs. I think also because what we are really sharing amongst the three of us are sub-specializations of the UX field. So I think it's really important to understand we are all under that big umbrella. So we are all brothers and sisters, right? So there's a bit of that overlap. I think in terms of strategist itself, I think one of the main differences around being a UX strategist and a product manager is the question between the focus on business versus product. And business, which a UX strategist focuses on, is slightly different from product. You might be in a company where the one product is the entire business, and then you see a lot of overlap, but it's slightly different. And I would say if you're in the role of understanding and strategizing for business, you're probably talking to people in the C-suite and less of the build team and managing tech and UX and business side of things. So that's my take, Julie.
Thank you, Khai Seng. Thanks, guys. That's really interesting. And I love your points. The user experience, we're all here to create great experiences for the user and using different kind of points of view on that. That was really helpful. Another big question that came in was talking about the use of data in your work. I'd like to hear you guys talk a little bit about how you use data, big data, in your work in the different specialties that you guys work in.
Okay, I'll go first again, given I'm the researcher. So yeah, half my team is quantitative researchers, so they look into our logs, big data, numbers, all of that. We use that a lot to understand users. Though I think I've seen a question around that. Why do you need a UX researcher if you have big data? The problem about quantitative data is that it always helps you to understand what is happening, but it never helps you understand why is it happening. And so quant data without qual is shallow, and that's why the best results you get when you combine that. But at the same time, it's often very difficult to take informed decision based on qual data only. So that's why we have both. And I think to have a good informed product strategy and move towards a good product, you need as much data as you can get, and that includes quant and qual.
Yeah, I think I'll jump in here as well. I think the idea of like big data versus thick data with qualitative, I think comes into play. I think from a strategist perspective, you also want data about your organization. How are your stakeholders like? What are the power dynamics like? Who likes what kind of expertise? I think that richness of the data set of the organization itself and the business, I think it's also part of being able to then essentially round it off, I think, as well.
If I can add one more thing, I'm just gonna wear my researcher hat if that's okay. All right. This is a really hard question coming from a writer's perspective because well, if I could be honest with everyone here, it's really hard for us to adopt numbers into writings. Basically, what we do with numbers is to find out, for example, which user scenarios has the most bounce rate, for example, or they don't look good in sales. That's where we try to find out why the qualitative from our UX researchers. So we work very closely with our UX researchers to know to make sure that the words not only are clear but or like whimsical, but also solve your problems. They're actionable. That's for me.
Thank you so much. I think it's such a big question. Like, how do you measure the user experience and how do we react to it in our work? And I love that point of view of taking all the different lenses on the data and coming out with that why to help us drive the product forward. Those are great. Thank you for sharing those points of view. All right, one more question. I'd like to hear from you guys, speaking of hats, what is a UX hat that you think will become more relevant in the coming years?
Can I answer that? UX writing, I guess. if I'm not too selfish about that, yeah. No, because well, from my perspective, because before I joined this field and before I joined Gojek as a UX writer, before I joined Blibli as a UX writer, not many people care about the words in the app, right? On the websites. Well, it's not that they care, but it's just they put less attention on the words besides the design overall. So I think it's slowly becoming a quote unquote unicorn skill, as they say, because we UX writers not only try to put up the best words in our app, but we also try to advocate and tell people that it matters, that we can contribute more to copy, although the output is only copy. So I think, like, I don't know, a year, 2 years, 5 years later, I think it will become more important. We'll be involved in many more meetings, not only in the last step of the design process, but also in the beginning. So that's one of the roles that I think will grow in the coming years.
I think it's PGM, UX PGM, program management. Because the larger the UX teams get, the more coordination is needed between UX and the different and PM and Eng disciplines and others. And so it doesn't scale. And program managers help creating the processes and scale it. And so if I would have a free headcount right now, I would hire a PGM.
Nice. I think just to build on that point as well, I think designing the organization, so the processes around how people interact and build products, I think that's where design ops and research ops comes in. So processes and relationships, and actually how the organization should be structured. I think it's a hat that UX designers will slowly blend into, and it will be quite critical in changing organizations. Yeah. And I think everybody wants to be ahead, right? Not at the end saying, hey, can you do this quickly for me? Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, that's a great point, Khai Seng. That's a really interesting view of the future. I think that as our field also becomes more and more relevant, as the UX scene here in Singapore and in Asia Pacific generally is growing, as these teams expand, there's going to be a lot of future and opportunities for us to grow our careers and for new people to join and influence the future of technology that's coming from the region. So I think that's so exciting to think about how we could be a part of that. If I can ask you for a bonus question, there were a lot of questions about how to transition into UX from other roles. We get this one a lot on UX evenings, and I'd love to hear your kind of point of view if I can get kind of a quick answer about what would you recommend for transitioning into the UX field?
Yeah, so I think transitioning into UX from other disciplines is possible, but it should come with an attitude that you have to learn what it means, like the craft of that role. And so you can do that on the job. Sometimes there's people who transition doing internships or some kind of trainee positions and learning on the job, or going back to school and actually learning about the craft. But I made a joke before in the chat, like just thinking, oh, a researcher speaks with users, I can do that, is not going to work, and shows a lot of disrespect towards the people who work in that field and actually did a lot of studies to know what they're doing. But it's possible, and we have a lot of people who transition with the additional work of learning about the craft.
I guess if the one of the things that people misunderstand about well, in this case moving to UX writing, is that you have to have a UX writing experience before to get in here, to get into this field. But that's a big no. I mean, like if you have the if you have the motivation to know a lot about user experience, and you like writing, you can get into this field. So if you right now you are a copywriter in the marketing department, for example, or if you're a technical writer, if you're an SEO writer, there's always an opportunity to become a UX writer. I get a lot of quite a few messages on LinkedIn, like asking me like, hey Edwin, so I'm a copywriter, can I move to UX writer? Or like I'm in the HR department, can I move to UX writer? So I always ask them back, do you like writing? Are you interested in UX? I mean, if you are, then like read books, read the Medium articles, try to make case studies for your portfolio, build it from there, and then yeah, try to apply. That's what I can say.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. I don't really have a good answer. My first response is being willing to drop your past training and really look at the UX field or the craft with like beginner's eyes and beginner's mindset. Because I think that there's a lot of people who I know from business, from legal professions, from all sorts of backgrounds, and that's wonderful, I think, coming to UX. But they try and understand UX through their previous training, and I think that's not helpful in trying to really understand the depth and philosophy of it. So I'll say, yeah, being able to drop their previous one, but also pick it up later on. It's not about fully ignoring that. Yeah, that's it for me.
It's a really good answer. And I think it's always a bit of a mirage because we're all users, right? We all use products. We all have this experience in our day-to-day life. So it's one of those great mirages of working in UX is what extra skills do you need? I'm a user. I understand it. So I really like your guys' advice, and I appreciate your practical and thoughtful replies to that. This brings us towards the end. We're quite over time, and I'm so grateful to you all for your thoughtful and meaningful presentations to talk about the field of user experience. In the chat, if you have any suggestions about what we can do at future UX Evenings events, we run these quarterly. So we'd love to hear from you on what topics you'd like to see, or if you have people you'd like to hear from. I also want to just wish everyone a lot of safety right now. I know there's a lot going on in the world. I hope everyone stays safe out there. And my last thank you is to the team who put this together. An incredible group of Googlers have done an amazing job to put together this event and make it so smooth and seamless for all of us. So I want to say a big thank you to the team for putting together such a wonderful event again. And I hope you'll join us next quarter towards the end of the year for another UX evening. These have been really special, and thank you all for your time. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Julie and team. Bye-bye.
Bye,
Bye, guys.
See you.
See you.